Welcome, dear listeners. In tonight's story, we learn that some secrets are buried for a reason. For Arthur, a student desperate for tuition money, this lesson began in a foggy cemetery. "It's not grave robbing if no one mourns them," Professor Finch would say, his voice a comforting balm on a raw conscience. "Besides," he'd add, "it's for science." And so Arthur and the others believed him. Each week another silent form was delivered to a hidden laboratory, deep beneath the university's biology building. In return, a thick envelope of cash was pressed into their hands, no questions asked. The goal was not to cure a monster, nor to hunt one. It was to build one. Professor Professor Finch was a geneticist possessed by a singular obsession. He believed the old legends of werewolves were not myth, but dormant biology, a primal blueprint hidden within human DNA, waiting for the right key, a key he would forge from spliced animal genomes, synthetic serums, and reanimated human tissue from the forgotten dead. The first experiments were grotesque failures. The dead, submerged in Finch's concoctions, would twitch. Sometimes a groan would escape lifeless lips, or a corpse might suddenly sit bolt upright on the slab, its eyes wide and vacant. But there was no mind, no instinct, no change, just the grim puppetry of science without a soul. At first, the students were horrified, but with each failure, a grim numbness set in. The horror became routine, the body's mere material. They would talk of classes and girls while preparing the slabs, their laughter echoing unnaturally in the sterile room. All but Arthur. For him, the shock never faded. It only burrowed deeper. As the weeks turned to months, the supply of fresh graves dwindled. Desperation, like a fever, began to set in. The students, now bound to the professor by a chain of shared secrets and stained money, began sneaking bodies from the cold storage of hospital morgues. The line between science and sacrilege had been crossed long ago. Soon, whispers slithered across campus, stories of missing vagrants, of faces on lampposts that were there one day and gone the next. Arthur wanted out. The guilt was a stone in his gut, but the professor, with a hand on his shoulder and eyes gleaming with fervor, promised the end was near. One final subject was all he needed. He tried to confide in one of the other students, cornering him after a lecture. "Don't you see where this is going?" Arthur pleaded. The student, whose pockets were heavy with Finch's money, just shook his head. "Keep your mouth shut, Arthur. We're too deep in this now. Just get the work done. Don't ruin this for us." Experiment 17 was different. The body was unidentified, exhumed from a shallow, unmarked grave on the outskirts of town. It was tall, powerfully built, with a history of violence etched into its very bones. For 3 days, it lay submerged in a tank of shimmering emerald serum, silent and still. Then it opened its eyes. It did not speak. It did not scream. It simply watched, its gaze unnervingly lucid. On the 4th day, it began to feed. With terrifying efficiency, it consumed the failed experiments stored in the lab's cold lockers. They heard the sounds, the tearing of flesh, the splintering of bone, and found only empty, mangled remnants. At night, they heard it pacing behind the reinforced glass of its new enclosure, a heavy, rhythmic tread that spoke not of mindless shuffling, but of caged patience. "We've done it," the professor whispered, his face alight with triumph. "Behold, Subject Fenris." The creature began to exhibit a chilling intelligence. It never paced when the professor was gone, only when he was present, as if performing for him. One evening, as Finch gestured while explaining a theory. The shadow behind the glass mimicked the gesture perfectly a second later. It was learning. It was watching. It escaped on the seventh night. There was no grand alarm, no bloody bath. They arrived the next morning to find only an open door, its lock not broken, but seemingly unlocked from the inside. Deep, claw-like scratches scarred the steel frame, a silent testament to its departure. The cage was empty. Then the other students began to disappear. First, the brash one who told Arthur to keep quiet. Then, the quiet one who worked in the morgue. One by one, they vanished from their dorms, their classes, their lives. Their rooms left as if they had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. The campus moved on with chilling indifference. Students laughed on the green. Professors lectured in packed halls, and the missing posters curled and faded in the autumn rain. For Arthur, the bustling campus became the most terrifying place of all, a sea of oblivious faces, deaf to the monster walking among them. Soon only Arthur remained. Sleep-deprived and haunted by shadows, he became the professor's sole assistant, a prisoner of his own fear. He couldn't go to the police, for who would believe him? And what would happen if he, too, simply vanished one night? He was trapped, a fly caught in a web of his own making. He began his own frantic, secret research, desperate for an answer. He spent nights in the university archives, poring over old yearbooks and architectural plans, looking for any mention of strange occurrences, of secret rooms, of anything that might explain Finch's obsession. He felt he was being watched, even there. One night, while reorganizing the professor's neglected files, his hand brushed against something wedged deep beneath a filing cabinet. It was not a modern text, but a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The ink was faded, but the drawings within were chillingly, unmistakably clear. The journal did not belong to Professor Finch. The date on the inside cover read 1893. Page after page contained diagrams of lunar cycles, human skulls, and horrific sketches of wolf-like creatures, their rib cages torn open mid-transformation. It was a research journal, detailing a series of experiments identical to their own. Arthur's blood ran cold as he read the frantic script. Test 12 showed signs of awareness before collapse. Must find subjects with natural aggression. And then the final terrifying entry. One survived. It learned. It fed. We could not destroy it. We have sealed it in the foundational chambers below the university. Scrambling back to the archives, he found it. A campus blueprint from 1890. There, marked in faded ink directly beneath the location of their modern lab, was a small, windowless section labeled simply, Foundational Chamber, Quarantine Access. The journal wasn't a warning. For Finch, it had been a map. The truth hit him like a physical blow. They hadn't created a werewolf. They had merely dug one up. The unmarked grave on the edge of town, it wasn't a grave. It was a prison. And they, in their arrogance, had handed it the key. He had to confront Finch. He found the professor in his office, calmly reviewing star charts. "This has all happened before," Arthur said, his voice shaking as he held up the journal. "You knew. That thing we dug up, it wasn't a new creation." Finch looked up, not with surprise, but with a serene, chilling calm. "Indeed," he said. "You released it," Arthur accused, his voice rising. Professor Finch slowly removed his spectacles, polishing them with a cloth. "Not released, Arthur," he corrected gently. "Reawakened. I have always believed that true knowledge has a cost. This was a price I was willing for others to pay for my discovery. The others? The students? Arthur stammered, backing slowly towards the door. What about them? The professor smiled, a thin, predatory expression. Mere appetizers, necessary sacrifices to restore its strength after a century of slumber. But its true potential? That requires a more willing participant. I need you, Arthur, the professor whispered, his voice a low rasp, for Experiment 18. As Arthur fumbled for the doorknob, the flickering gaslight caught the side of Finch's neck. He saw them then, not one, but a series of small, dark puncture marks. The veins around them bulged, pulsing with a faint silvery light. The professor's eyes were changing. The familiar bloodshot exhaustion was gone, replaced by a luminous, predatory silver. He stood, not with the stoop of an academic, but with a newfound terrifying strength, his joints cracking and popping. The lights in the lab flickered violently, then died, plunging them into near darkness. From somewhere deep below them, from the foundational chambers of the university, a long guttural howl echoed up through the floorboards. It was a howl of hunger, of dominance. And in the darkness, Professor Finch lifted his head and answered with a sharp, terrifying cry of his own, a cry of acceptance. Arthur was never seen again. The laboratory was eventually shut down, cited for an unrelated chemical spill. The professor vanished without a trace. The university, eager to avoid scandal, sealed the sub-basement with concrete and steel, burying its century-old secret once more. But some things cannot be contained so easily. Now, on dark nights when the moon is full, locals in the woods bordering the campus swear they hear two howls. One is deep and ancient, guttural with age and power. The other is higher-pitched, faster, filled with a terrible youthful hunger. Some say they are fighting for territory, but others, the ones who know the truth, believe they are hunting together. Thank you for watching our latest tale from Beyond the Veil. If you have enjoyed our spooky story, feel free to drop a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you dare. And if you want to hear our next tale of terror from the pages of this old volume, click the story on the screen now. Until next time.